What steps do you need to follow to produce a podcast? The answer to that is in this video. Hey there and welcome to the Podcast Lab TV, the YouTube channel dedicated to helping you become a better independent podcaster. If you've been asking yourself what are the steps you need to follow to record a podcast episode, you're in the right place. In a previous video, I've talked about the pre-production, the phase that comes before recording the interview. So in case you're at the beginning stages of your podcasting journey and have questions about the pre-production, check out that video that you find in the linked videos. In this one, we're gonna focus on the recording. Are you ready? Alright, let's get started. Recording day has arrived. So what should you do before you start recording? I'm gonna share some tips for both recording solo or recording with somebody else, whether it's an interview you conduct or perhaps you co-host. The first thing you want to do is to check your recording space and gear. If you're recording in an office, for example, and there is an AC, you want to make sure that you turn the air conditioning off. Perhaps you live close to a busy street and you can hear cars passing by. In that case, you want to make sure that you close the windows. Long story short, you want to make sure that your recording space doesn't have any background noise, or it has as little background noise as possible, and you want to make sure that your room sounds great. When it comes to your gear, you want to double check that everything works, so that all of your cables are connected to the right place, that all of your knobs are at the right spot, that everything is turned on. If you are recording in a place where there are other people around, perhaps your home, a co-working space or something like that, you want to make sure that you let other people know not to disturb you, and you can do so by telling them and or by adding a sign on the door, for example, recording an interview or something like that. Next up is your computer. You want to make sure that you close all the programs, applications, softwares, windows, tabs that you won't need for recording. If you have some notes or you have some questions for the interview, great, you can leave those up. Everything else should be closed, including programs like Dropbox, for example, that run in the background. And the reason for that is that we want to make sure that our computer doesn't slow down or crashes even. If you have a phone, you want to make sure to put it on silence, and I typically turn the vibration off too, so that there is no background noise. It's very important that you do that because you want to avoid that throughout your recording, your phone rings or you get a text or a notification and people hear that during your recording. When it comes to the actual recording, so you're ready to record, my advice is to first and foremost make sure that if you conduct an interview, the guests know how to reach you, how to join you. So whether it's Skype, Zoom, or anything else. Same for a co-host. If you have recorded with a co-host before, then I'm pretty sure the two of you already know how to go about things. My advice is, regardless of how you go about recording your podcast, whether you're recording in person, you're using something like Skype to communicate, Ecamm call recorder to record, or maybe you use, I don't know, Spreaker Studio, Ringer, or Audacity, Zencaster. My recommendation is, regardless of how you go about recording, you want to have two sources of recording. In other words, you want to have your main recording and also a backup recording. And here's why. Since technology is quite unpredictable, you want to avoid relying only on one source of recording, just one tool, because there's gonna be one day where maybe you land that big guest that you've been chasing for months, you're ready to record, and for whatever reason the program doesn't work or crashes or whatever. So to avoid headaches, just have two ways of recording your podcast, a main and a backup. The way I go about it is very simple. I use Skype as the platform to talk to the guest I interview. I use a tool called Ecamm Call Recorder to record the interview. I also use a web-based tool called Zencaster. So this way I always have two ways of recording. The first one is Skype plus Ecamm call recorder, and the second one is with Zencastr. When I record solo, I typically use Audacity. Again, it doesn't really matter how you go about recording your podcast. My advice though, especially if you use some digital tool, make sure to have a main way of recording your podcast and always a backup. And in case you're wondering how much extra work having a backup is, it's not really that much extra work. The only addition I have to do is to literally open a tab, share a link with my guest, hit record, and that's it. And Zencastr, Ecamm call recorder run in the background and they don't get in the way. A thing you could consider doing if you conduct interviews is before you hit record to ask your guest if he or she has recording capabilities. In that case, you would have not only your end recording both sides of the conversation, obviously, but you would also have the guest. This is something that can be done depending on the niche you're in. If you're interviewing podcasters, for example, well, guess what? Everybody has recording capabilities. So in that case, you can rely on everyone. On the other hand, if you're interviewing somebody or you're in a niche where recording isn't really a common thing, that may not be the case, but you can ask your guest without any problem. In case you're wondering about live streaming a podcast, you can check out Spreaker Studio. I mentioned it early on when I listed a few ways you can go about recording your podcast. Spreaker Studio allows you to record by yourself, record interviews by leveraging Spreaker Studio in combination with Skype, and it also lets you broadcast your podcast live. So if that's something you want to do, check out the links in the description, and I've linked to Spreaker Studio and the other resources I've mentioned. Okay, so now you know what goes into the production side of a podcast. The question is, how can you systemize this specific step of the overall podcasting workflow? Well, this step is probably the most difficult to systemize, meaning there aren't really many automations or hacks you can rely on. The best thing to do is to have some kind of checklist, whether it's on paper or on a digital tool. I use Trello, for example, where you write down the steps that go into you recording. For example, turn off air conditioning or put phone on silence, close programs, open recording tool 1, open recording tool 2 as a backup, pull up the questions and things of this nature. So the best way you can systemize the production of your podcast is by thinking about all the steps that go into you actually recording the episode, and then list those down somewhere, again, whether it's pen and paper or a digital tool. In this video, we've talked about one aspect of the bigger puzzle, which is the podcasting workflow. If you want to take a look at the bigger picture, at all the components that go into a podcasting workflow for independent podcasters, then you can check out in the link videos. You're gonna find a link that talks about all the different steps of the podcasting workflow. If it's your first time watching, thank you so much for being here with me. If you've been here with me before, thank you so much for being back. Make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and enable the notification setting so that you're always gonna be notified as soon as a new video has been published.